She gave up her child for adoption, but what happens when they reunite 25 years later will bring you to tears. Sophia sat in her high-rise office. The skyline of the city sprawled out beyond the window. The setting sun reflected off the glass buildings, casting an orange glow over her polished oak desk. She leaned back in her leather chair, exhausted, yet nothing on the surface indicated the storm of emotions that simmered beneath her calm exterior. As a 50-year-old partner at a prestigious law firm, Sophia was the epitome of success. She had a reputation for being unshakable, tough in negotiations, precise in her legal strategy, and utterly composed. But that strength came with a price, one she rarely acknowledged, even to herself. The phone on her desk buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. She glanced at it but didn't pick up. It was another call from her assistant, reminding her of the dinner she had scheduled with a colleague, yet another function she would attend with the same rehearsed smile. The perfect life she had built for herself felt like a cage these days, cold, mechanical, and distant. She stood and moved toward the window, staring blankly at the city below. The distance from the world outside felt like the distance she had created in her own life. Sophia had always been good at compartmentalizing her emotions, burying her past so deep that even she rarely ventured into those locked corners of her mind. But lately, the memories had been stirring, especially as her 50th birthday approached. A small picture frame caught her eye on a nearby shelf. It wasn't a picture she kept visible for guests or colleagues, but she often found herself looking at it when she was alone. The photo was old, a grainy snapshot of a much younger version of herself holding a newborn baby swaddled in a hospital blanket. Her smile in the photo was bittersweet, even back then. That baby, her baby, was the source of her deepest regret. 25 years ago, Sophia had been a different person. A scared, overwhelmed 25-year-old woman with no money, no support, and no way to care for a child. The decision to give her baby up for adoption had been devastating, but at the time, she had convinced herself it was the best option. She was struggling to survive on her own, working long hours at a diner while barely scraping by. Her dreams of finishing law school had been slipping further from her grasp. And the father? He had disappeared as soon as he'd learned about the pregnancy. She hadn't had the strength to raise a child alone. Sophia had told herself that her decision was selfless, that she was giving her baby a better chance at life. The family she chose had been kind, stable, and loving, but that didn't ease the pain of handing over her child. The image of those final moments in the adoption agency office was seared into her memory. The sterile smell of the room, the mechanical hum of the clock ticking away time, and the feeling of holding her daughter for what she knew would be the last time. The baby had been so small, her delicate fingers wrapping around Sophia's thumb, as if begging her not to let go. But she had let go. She signed the papers, tears falling silently as she turned her back and walked out of the office, leaving her heart behind with that tiny bundle of warmth. In the years that followed, Sophia had forced herself to move on. She buried herself in her career, built a life of order and control, and convinced herself that the past was a closed chapter. But the truth was, the wound had never healed. She had never stopped wondering, was her daughter happy? Did she have a good life? Did she ever think about the mother who had given her up? Sophia's eyes welled up with unshed tears as she looked at the photo. Over the years, she had tried to keep the memories at bay, but they always found a way to slip through the cracks. And now, more than ever, she couldn't ignore the weight of her past. Every success she had achieved felt hollow. Every milestone marked by the absence of the one person who mattered the most, the child she had never truly known. She clenched her fists, willing herself to stop thinking about it. There was no going back, no undoing the choices she had made. She was too far removed now, too disconnected. What good would it do to dredge up old wounds? And yet, a part of her, some small, broken part, longed for something she could never have. Sophia shook her head, clearing her thoughts, and turned back toward her desk. She had work to do, cases to prepare for. The past was a weight she had carried alone for years. She could carry it a little longer. But even as she tried to push the memories aside, She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that her past wasn't as distant as she had convinced herself it was. With a deep breath, she returned to her desk and picked up the phone, the mask of composure slipping back into place as she answered the call. She wasn't ready to face the truth yet, not today. But deep down, Sophia knew that time had a way of catching up with you, no matter how far you tried to run. The rain fell in a light drizzle, blurring the outlines of the city and casting the park in a gray, dreamlike haze. Sophia had been walking aimlessly for almost an hour, drawn outside by a restlessness she couldn't shake. Her shoes made soft, wet sounds against the pavement, but she barely noticed the cold seeping through her coat or the dampness in her hair. This was unlike her. This impulsive, unplanned walk in the rain. Usually, her life was governed by strict routines, each day mapped out with precision. Yet today, she had felt the sudden need to escape. The park was nearly empty, the dreary weather keeping most people indoors. But Sophia found some strange comfort in the solitude. The quietness of the world around her mirrored the hollow space she felt inside. She pulled her coat tighter around her as she rounded a bend, her thoughts swirling like the raindrops falling from the sky. As she walked past an old oak tree, something caught her eye, a figure sitting on a park bench under the partial cover of the tree's branches. Sophia slowed her pace, squinting through the rain. It was a young person, hunched over something in their lap. At first, she thought they were just another passerby, someone seeking shelter from the rain. But as she drew closer, she noticed the canvas propped against the figure's knees, a set of paintbrushes scattered on the bench beside them. The young artist was struggling against the elements. Raindrops dripped off the edges of the canvas, smearing the unfinished sketch. The brushes rolled off the bench, falling into the wet grass, but the artist didn't seem to care. They were focused, intensely lost in their work, their brow furrowed in concentration. Something about the scene stopped Sophia in her tracks. There was a strange pull, an inexplicable sense of familiarity that settled in her chest as she stood there, watching. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, her heart tightened, and she felt an urge to approach the artist. Sophia hesitated. She wasn't the type to strike up conversations with strangers. She preferred to keep her distance, maintain the boundaries she had carefully built over the years. But today was different. Today, something about this solitary figure felt like an invitation, or perhaps a challenge. Without thinking too much about it, she stepped forward. "Here, let me help you with those," she said, her voice soft but audible over the rain. She bent down and picked up one of the fallen brushes, holding it out to the young artist. The figure looked up, startled by the interruption. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. The artist was young, mid-20s, maybe. Dark hair, tousled from the rain, framed a face that was both youthful and burdened with something heavier, something unspoken. Their eyes were a striking shade of green, the kind that seemed to hold a depth beyond their years. "Thanks," the artist replied, their voice quiet but steady. They took the brush from her, their fingers brushing briefly against hers. It was a small, almost insignificant moment, but it sent a strange jolt through Sophia, like a fleeting connection she wasn't ready to examine. She smiled, though it felt awkward, unnatural. "You must really love what you're doing to be out here in this weather." The artist shrugged, a small, almost sad smile tugging at their lips. "Sometimes it's the only thing that makes sense, you know?" Sophia nodded, though she wasn't sure why. She had never been an artist, never understood the need to create something from nothing. But there was a familiarity in those words, in the way the artist spoke them with such quiet conviction. Something about this person reminded her of herself, of the version of herself she had been before life had beaten her into submission. "What are you working on?" she asked, more out of politeness than genuine curiosity. She wasn't the kind of person who asked personal questions, especially not of strangers. The artist glanced down at the canvas, then back at Sophia. "Just trying to capture something I can't quite put into words." Sophia felt an unexpected pang of understanding. She looked at the canvas, but the image was too blurred by rain to make out. "Sometimes words aren't enough," she said softly, almost to herself. They shared a moment of silence, the rain continuing its steady patter around them. Sophia suddenly felt self-conscious, unsure of why she was lingering. She had offered her help, and now the interaction should be over. But she couldn't bring herself to walk away just yet. "Do you come here often?" she asked, a little too quickly, trying to fill the silence. The artist shook their head. "No, not really. I just needed some space to think." Sophia nodded again, feeling the weight of their words. She knew that feeling all too well, the need for space, for silence, for something that might offer clarity. She had spent so many years pushing her thoughts down, avoiding the things that hurt too much to face. "Well, I should probably let you get back to it," she said finally, taking a small step back. The artist glanced up at her again, and there was something in their gaze, something searching, as if they, too, felt the strange connection between them. "Thanks for your help," they said again, a little more softly this time. "I appreciate it." Sophia gave a small nod, her heart heavy with an emotion she couldn't name. As she turned to leave, she heard the artist call after her. "My name's Alex, by the way." She stopped, turning back to meet their gaze. "Sophia," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, their eyes locked again, and she felt that strange, familiar pull tighten in her chest. Without another word, Sophia walked away, her mind racing. The encounter had been brief, fleeting, but it left a deep impression on her. Something about Alex stirred memories she had spent years trying to bury. The sound of the rain, the solitude of the park, and the sight of that young artist alone on the bench. It all felt like a scene from another time, another life. As she walked home, the image of Alex lingered in her mind. Their eyes, their voice, their quiet intensity, it all felt so familiar, and yet Sophia couldn't quite place why. She had long ago trained herself not to dwell on the past, not to let herself think about the child she had given up, the life she had lost. But now, after years of suppressing those memories, they began to surface with a force she wasn't prepared for. The rain fell harder, drenching her as she walked, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were too consumed with the questions swirling in her mind. Who was Alex? And why did she feel such a deep, inexplicable connection to them? Sophia's heart raced as she realized the one possibility she had tried so hard to avoid thinking about, the one that terrified her the most. Could it be? No, it was impossible. And yet, the feeling remained, gnawing at her as the rain washed over her, each step she took leading her deeper into the tangled web of her past. Sophia didn't sleep much that night. Her mind kept returning to Alex, their eyes, their words, the strange connection she had felt. She couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter was more than a coincidence, though the rational part of her tried to dismiss it. It was probably just some odd, fleeting interaction. But something about the way Alex had looked at her lingered, like a whisper from the past that refused to be ignored. The next day, the rain had stopped, leaving the city under a blanket of damp, gray clouds. Sophia's thoughts were still restless as she made her way to a place she hadn't visited in months, the cemetery where her mother was buried. The cemetery had always been a quiet refuge for Sophia, a place where she could let down her guard, if only for a little while. Her mother had passed away several years ago, but Sophia still visited occasionally, though less frequently as time went on. It had become harder for her to face those quiet moments, the space where her grief for her mother intertwined with the deeper, unspoken grief for the child she had lost. As she walked through the rows of gravestones, the familiar ache settled in her chest. She had always struggled with expressing her emotions, but here, in the stillness of the cemetery, they often felt closer to the surface, even if she rarely acknowledged them. She approached her mother's grave, the stone cold beneath her fingers as she traced the engraved letters. For a moment, she let herself feel the weight of the loss. The air was heavy with a quiet sadness, the wind rustling through the trees. But as she stood there, something unusual caught her attention. A figure sat near a different gravestone, a few rows over. At first, Sophia didn't recognize them, but as she squinted through the mist, a shock of recognition jolted through her. It was Alex. They sat with their head bowed, their knees pulled up to their chest, arms wrapped tightly around themselves as if trying to ward off the cold. Sophia froze, unsure of what to do. She hadn't expected to see them again, especially not here. What were the odds? The same person she had met in the park now sitting just a few graves away, as if fate were weaving their paths together in ways she couldn't understand. She hesitated, watching from a distance. There was a profound sadness in the way Alex sat, a heaviness that mirrored her own. They didn't notice her at first, too lost in their thoughts, their hand resting on the gravestone beside them. As Sophia drew closer, her heart began to race, an inexplicable tension building in her chest. The gravestone that Alex was sitting beside came into view, and Sophia felt her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't just any gravestone. The name carved into the stone was unfamiliar, but the realization hit her like a wave of cold water. It was Alex's adoptive mother's grave. Sophia's world seemed to tilt on its axis. The pieces started falling into place, though she wasn't ready to accept what her mind was piecing together. Alex had mentioned being adopted, though the brief conversation in the park hadn't delved into specifics. Now, standing just a few feet away, the truth seemed to loom in front of her, undeniable and terrifying. Sophia took a step forward, the sound of her movement finally catching Alex's attention. Their head lifted slowly, and their eyes, those same striking green eyes, met hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt charged with something unspoken, something that neither of them fully understood yet. "Hey," Alex said, their voice quiet and hoarse. They wiped at their eyes, though Sophia could tell they had been crying. "Hi," Sophia replied, her voice just as soft, unsure of what else to say. They stared at each other for a moment longer before Alex glanced back at the gravestone, a deep sadness darkening their features. "I come here sometimes, just to think. It's been a few years since she passed, but it still feels fresh, you know?" Sophia nodded, her throat tight. She knew that feeling all too well, the way grief clung to you, even after the initial shock faded. But she couldn't bring herself to say anything. Her mind was spinning with the realization she wasn't ready to confront. Alex sighed, running a hand through their damp hair. "I never really knew my biological parents. I've been looking for them for a while now, but it's been hard. No leads, no real information. Sometimes I think I'll never find them." Their voice cracked at the end, betraying the deep pain they had been carrying. Sophia's heart clenched painfully. She stood there, frozen, as the truth settled heavily between them. Alex was her child. The same child she had given up 25 years ago. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave, nearly knocking the breath out of her. Her child, her daughter, right in front of her, and they had no idea. The weight of the revelation pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe. 1,000 emotions crashed over her all at once: guilt, regret, fear, and a desperate, aching longing she had kept buried for so long. She wanted to say something, to reach out and tell Alex the truth, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain? How could she tell them that she had been the one who abandoned them all those years ago, that she had walked away, thinking she was doing the right thing, only to be haunted by that decision every day since? How could she make them understand that she had never stopped thinking about them, even though she had stayed silent for so long? Sophia's hands trembled, and she took a small step back, unable to face the enormity of the situation. She could feel Alex's eyes on her, confused by her sudden change in demeanor, but she couldn't bear to stay there any longer. I have to go," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Panic was starting to rise in her chest, threatening to drown her. "I'm sorry." Without waiting for a response, Sophia turned and walked away as quickly as she could, her heart pounding in her ears. She could feel Alex's confused gaze following her, but she didn't dare look back. She couldn't face the truth, not yet. The shock, the guilt, the overwhelming fear, it was too much to process all at once. Sophia's mind was in chaos as she hurried out of the cemetery. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, and her breaths came in shallow gasps. The world around her felt surreal, like a dream she couldn't wake from. How could this be happening? How had fate brought Alex into her life after all these years, only for her to be too afraid to tell them the truth? When she finally reached the street, she leaned against a wall, trying to catch her breath. Her hands were still shaking, her heart racing uncontrollably. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run as far away as possible, but none of that would fix what was broken inside her. Sophia closed her eyes, letting the tears finally spill over. She had spent so many years hiding from her past, burying the pain so deep that she thought she could live without confronting it. But now it was all crashing down around her. Alex, her child, was standing right in front of her, searching for answers, and she didn't have the courage to face them. What would Alex think if they knew? Would they hate her? Would they reject her the way she had rejected them all those years ago? Sophia couldn't bear the thought. The fear of losing Alex again, of being rejected by her own child, was too much to handle. She had spent so long building walls around her heart, walls that were now crumbling at the worst possible moment. She had to decide. Would she continue to run, to hide from the truth, or would she face the painful reality and try to make amends? But even as she asked herself that question, she knew the answer wouldn't come easily. Sophia wiped at her eyes, her chest still heavy with the weight of her secret. She didn't know what to do next. All she knew was that her life had changed forever, and there was no going back. The familiar click of the front door echoed through the quiet of Sophia's spacious apartment as she stepped inside, but the comfort she usually found in her home was absent. The walls, once filled with pride and accomplishment, now felt oppressive, as if they were closing in around her. Every inch of the space felt meticulously curated, controlled, and cold, just like her life. Sophia dropped her keys onto the table, her hands still trembling from the encounter at the cemetery. She stood there for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart, but the panic lingered just beneath the surface. Her mind was a chaotic swirl of thoughts, emotions she had tried to suppress for years bubbling up, overwhelming her. Alex was her child, her daughter, and she had run. With shaky hands, she poured herself a glass of water, trying to steady her breathing. The weight of what she had just discovered pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She could feel the fear creeping in, wrapping around her like a vice. What if Alex never forgave her? What if she had missed her chance again? Sophia made her way to the living room, collapsing onto the couch. The silence of the apartment was deafening. She had spent years filling her life with work, with success, with distractions. But none of it could drown out the regret that now surged within her, stronger than it had ever been. The memories of the past came flooding back, sharper and more painful than they had in years. She pressed her palms against her forehead, squeezing her eyes shut, as if that could block out the barrage of images. But the flashbacks came, unrelenting and vivid. She saw herself at 25, young, overwhelmed, and terrified. She was standing in that small, sterile office, the sound of the clock ticking in the background as she signed the adoption papers with shaking hands. The pen felt heavy in her grip, every stroke of ink on paper cutting deeper into her heart. Her baby girl had been crying softly in the corner of the room, swaddled in a hospital blanket, unaware of the life-altering decision being made on her behalf. The adoption agent's voice was calm, soothing, as if that could ease the agony Sophia felt. "You're doing the right thing," they had said. "You're giving her a chance at a better life." Sophia had believed them. She had told herself that over and over, that she was too young, too financially unstable to raise a child, that her daughter would be better off with a family who could give her everything she couldn't. But as she handed her baby over to the adoptive parents, her heart had broken into pieces. She had wanted to hold her daughter one last time, but she hadn't. She hadn't trusted herself to let go if she did. Now, years later, the memory of that moment haunted her like a ghost she couldn't escape. She had spent so many years building a life that was carefully structured, a life where she didn't have to confront the pain of what she had done. But now, seeing Alex, hearing their voice, knowing that they had been searching for their biological mother, it was too much. The walls Sophia had built around herself were crumbling, and she didn't know how to stop it. The guilt was suffocating. All those years, she had convinced herself that it was for the best, that she had done the right thing. But had she? Had she truly given Alex a better life? Or had she simply abandoned them, leaving them to search for answers they deserved but never received? Sophia's chest tightened as she thought of the unopened letters sitting in the bottom of her drawer. Letters from Alex's adoptive parents. Letters she had ignored, too afraid to open them, too afraid of what they might say. She stood abruptly, her feet carrying her to the small office at the end of the hall. The drawer was locked, but she knew exactly where the key was. Her hands trembled as she pulled it from a nearby shelf and unlocked the drawer, her breath catching in her throat. There they were, the letters, neatly stacked, unopened, untouched. They were worn around the edges from years of being moved from place to place, but she had never been able to bring herself to read them. She had been too afraid of what they might say, too afraid of being confronted with the reality of the child she had given up. Sophia picked up the stack of letters, her heart racing as she slowly opened the first one. It was dated just a year after the adoption. Her hands shook as she read the careful handwriting of Alex's adoptive mother, describing how beautiful and smart Alex was, how much they loved her. There were stories of birthdays, of first steps, of Alex's love for drawing and painting even as a toddler. Sophia's vision blurred as she read through the letters, each one filled with love and joy, a family who had embraced Alex as their own. But there were also moments of heartache. The letter that described Alex asking about their biological mother for the first time, and how they had always told Alex that she had made the decision out of love. How they had tried to keep the door open for a reunion, hoping that someday, Sophia would be ready to reconnect. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she reached the final letter. It was different from the others, shorter, more somber. Alex's adoptive mother had written it shortly before her death, explaining that Alex had grown up to be a thoughtful, sensitive person, still searching for answers about their biological roots. The letter ended with a plea. Asterisk, if you ever decide to reach out, I believe it would mean the world to them. I hope that one day you will find the courage to do so. Asterisk. Sophia's hands fell to her lap, the letter slipping from her fingers as tears streamed down her face. She had been too afraid.
Too ashamed.
And now Alex had been left searching for answers, for the mother who had walked away, while she had done nothing. Her heart ached with a pain she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The distance, the emotional walls she had built, were crumbling faster now, and she didn't know how to stop it. She had spent so long protecting herself from the truth, but it had found her anyway. A knock on the door startled her, breaking through her spiral of emotions. Sophia wiped her eyes quickly, pulling herself together as best as she could. When she opened the door, her best friend, Mia, stood on the other side, her eyes full of concern. Sophia, Mia said softly, stepping inside without hesitation. What's going on? You haven't answered my calls, and you don't look okay. Sophia tried to form words, but they caught in her throat. Mia had been there for her, through everything, through the adoption, through the years of silence and distance. She was one of the few people who knew the truth about Sophia's past. And now, standing there with the letters scattered on the floor around her, Sophia couldn't hold back anymore. I found them, Sophia whispered, her voice breaking. Mia, I found my child. They were right in front of me and I couldn't tell them. Mia's face softened, and she pulled Sophia into a tight embrace, holding her as the dam finally broke. Sophia sobbed into her friend's shoulder, the weight of 25 years of guilt and regret crashing over her in waves. Mia held her for a long time before speaking. You've been carrying this for so long, Sophia. It's time to stop running. You need to face this for both of you. I don't know if I can, Sophia said, her voice barely audible. What if they hate me? What if it's too late? Mia pulled back, looking into her eyes. It's never too late to try. You've been given a second chance. Don't let fear stop you from taking it. Sophia nodded, though her heart was still heavy with fear. Mia was right, but the road ahead felt daunting, filled with uncertainty. Still, deep down, she knew she couldn't run anymore.
The truth was out now.
And no matter how painful it was, Sophia knew she had to find a way to make things right. The house was eerily quiet as Sophia sat alone in her study, the dim light from the desk lamp casting long shadows across the room. The letters from Alex's adoptive parents were still spread out in front of her, each one a reminder of the years she had spent running from the truth. The weight of her guilt sat heavy in her chest, but something deeper stirred beneath it now, an undeniable need to uncover the full truth, to piece together the missing parts of Alex's life. Mia's words from earlier echoed in her mind. Asterisk, you've been given a second chance. Don't let fear stop you from taking it. Asterisk. Sophia knew she couldn't continue hiding. The shock of discovering Alex was her child had nearly overwhelmed her, but now, the need for answers outweighed her fear. She needed to know what Alex had gone through, what their life had been like, and most of all, how they felt about the mother who had given them away. With trembling hands, she reached into the locked drawer in her desk. There was one file she had never been able to bring herself to open: the adoption records. They contained all the information she had chosen to distance herself from over the years, but now, she needed them. She pulled the file out, staring at it for a long moment before finally opening it. Inside were pages of documents, legal paperwork, medical forms, and letters from the adoption agency. As she sifted through the papers, her heart pounded in her chest. She felt as though she were peeling back layers of a wound that had never fully healed. The first few pages were clinical, filled with legal jargon and signatures. Her signature, scrawled in shaky handwriting, next to the words that had changed both of their lives forever. But then, buried beneath the legal documents, she found something she had forgotten existed. A series of letters from Alex's adoptive parents. They weren't long, but they were filled with warmth and love. Each letter described Alex's milestones, their first steps, their love of painting, their shy but curious nature. Sophia's hands shook as she read through them, the words bringing Alex's childhood to life in a way she had never allowed herself to imagine. She could picture them now, a small child with a paintbrush in hand, the same quiet intensity in their eyes that she had seen in the park. But as the letters progressed, Sophia noticed a change in tone. The joy of early childhood was replaced by the complexities of adolescence. The later letters spoke of Alex's struggles with identity, their growing curiosity about their biological mother, and the unspoken void that seemed to linger in their heart. Sophia's chest tightened with every word. It was clear that Alex had been searching for answers for a long time, answers she had been too afraid to provide. One letter in particular stood out. It was dated shortly after Alex's adoptive mother had passed away. The grief was palpable in the letter, but so was the desire for connection. Alex had been struggling, trying to make sense of their loss while still grappling with the unanswered questions about where they came from. Alex has been asking about you more often lately, the letter read. I think they're trying to understand where they belong in the world now that their mother is gone. I've tried to offer comfort, but I know that some answers only you can give. If there's ever a time when you feel ready, I know it would mean everything to them to hear from you. Sophia swallowed hard, her heart aching with the weight of her inaction. Alex had been searching for her, perhaps even meeting her, during one of the most difficult times of their life, and she had remained silent. The fear that had held her back now felt like a cruel betrayal. She had been too afraid of her own guilt, too afraid of being rejected, and in doing so, she had left Alex alone to navigate that pain. She reached for the next letter, her fingers brushing over the worn edges. This one was different from the others. It wasn't from Alex's adoptive parents, it was from Alex themselves. The letter was short, the handwriting hesitant, as if they weren't sure whether to send it at all. Dear Mom, the letter began, the words sending a sharp pain through Sophia's chest. I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'm writing to the right person, but I guess I wanted to try. I've been trying to find you, to understand why you gave me up. I want to know if you ever think about me. I want to know if you're okay. I've always wondered what it would be like to meet you, but I don't know if that's something you would ever want. Sophia's vision blurred with tears as she read the rest of the letter. It was filled with uncertainty, longing, and the unmistakable ache of a child who had grown up wondering why they weren't wanted. If you don't want to see me, I'll understand. I just wanted to know if you remember me. I've thought about you my whole life, and I guess I just needed to say that out loud, even if you never hear it. The letter ended abruptly, as if Alex had run out of words, unsure of what else to say. Sophia clutched the paper to her chest, the pain of the years lost between them almost unbearable. Alex had reached out multiple times, and she had done nothing. Her heart ached with the realization of how much she had let fear rule her life. Alex had been searching for her, and she had been hiding, too afraid to face the truth. But now, that fear felt small in comparison to the depth of regret she carried. Sophia wiped her eyes, her resolve hardening. She couldn't change the past, but she could do something now. Alex deserved answers, and she was the only one who could give them. The years of running, of hiding behind her success and her fear, were over. She wasn't sure what Alex would say, or if they would even want to hear from her. But she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't let this opportunity slip away. With trembling hands, Sophia picked up her phone and dialed the number for the adoption agency that had handled Alex's case all those years ago. Her heart raced as the line rang, each second feeling like an eternity. When the voice on the other end picked up, Sophia took a deep breath. "I'm looking for someone," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I think it's time we found each other." The cafe was quiet, the soft hum of conversation mingling with the hiss of the espresso machine in the background. Sophia sat at a small table near the window, her fingers wrapped tightly around the cup of coffee in front of her. Her stomach was in knots, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been preparing for this moment for days, replaying how it might go, but nothing could have prepared her for the intensity of the emotions she was feeling now that the moment had arrived. It had taken time to find the right words, to reach out to Alex. She had written and rewritten the message over and over, agonizing over every sentence. In the end, she had decided on simplicity, an apology for disappearing so suddenly at the cemetery, and a request to meet. To her surprise and immense relief, Alex had agreed. Now, as the minutes ticked by, Sophia felt the familiar tremor of fear creeping in. What if Alex didn't show up? What if this meeting only made things worse? What if her attempt to reconnect was too little, too late? She glanced at the door every time it opened, her breath catching in her throat, but it was never Alex. Each passing second felt like an eternity, her nerves fraying with the tension. She had spent so long imagining what this moment would be like, years of wondering, hoping, and fearing all wrapped up in the space between them. And now, after all this time, they were finally about to sit face to face. The door to the cafe opened again, and this time, it was Alex. Sophia's heart lurched in her chest as she saw them walk in. They looked different in the bright light of the cafe, more confident, less guarded than they had been in the rain-soaked park or the grief-laden cemetery. But there was still a quiet intensity in their eyes, a wariness that Sophia recognized all too well. Alex scanned the room for a moment before their eyes found hers. For a second, neither of them moved. Time seemed to stretch and warp around them, the rest of the world fading into the background. Then, slowly, Alex made their way to the table. "Hi," Alex said, their voice calm but tense as they sat down across from her. "Hi," Sophia replied, her own voice barely above a whisper. She swallowed hard, trying to gather her thoughts, but the weight of the moment pressed down on her, making it difficult to find the right words. They sat in silence for a few moments, both of them staring down at their cups, neither one knowing where to start. Sophia could feel the unspoken tension between them, thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. She knew that whatever happened next would determine the course of their relationship, if there even could be a relationship. "I'm sorry," Sophia finally said, her voice breaking the silence. "I'm sorry for running away the other day. I wasn't ready." Alex looked at her, their expression unreadable. "You weren't ready," they echoed softly, their tone laced with a mix of confusion and hurt. Sophia bit her lip, feeling the sharp sting of guilt. "No," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I've spent so long running from this from you. I thought I could keep it buried, but I can't anymore." Alex's eyes narrowed slightly, their hands resting on the table, fingers tapping rhythmically against the wood. "Why now?" they asked, their voice tight. "Why did you come back now? After all this time?" After disappearing for so long, why now? Sophia's throat tightened. She had known this question was coming, but that didn't make it any easier to answer. Because I was afraid, she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. I was afraid of facing you, of what you might think of me. I was ashamed of what I did, of giving you up, and I didn't know how to live with that shame. I thought staying away would make it easier for both of us. Alex's jaw clenched, their eyes filled with a simmering anger that Sophia had feared would surface. Easier, they repeated, disbelief edging their voice. You thought staying away would make it easier? You never once thought about what it was like for me? Growing up without knowing where I came from, without knowing why my own mother didn't want me. Sophia flinched at the harshness in their words, but she didn't blame Alex for their anger. She had spent years anticipating this very moment, fearing the questions that would come, fearing the answers she would have to give. I did think about you, Sophia said, her voice trembling. I thought about you every day, but I didn't think I deserved to be a part of your life after what I did. I thought I was protecting you by staying away, by not forcing myself into your world. But I see now that I was wrong. Alex stared at her, their eyes searching hers, trying to find the truth in her words. For a long time, they didn't say anything. Sophia could feel her heart breaking a little more with each passing second of silence. You didn't even try, Alex said finally, their voice barely above a whisper. You didn't try to find me. I waited for so long, hoping that one day you would show up, that you would want to know me. Sophia's chest ached with the weight of those words. I was afraid of what you would say if I did, she admitted. I was afraid you would hate me. Alex looked down at the table, their fingers still tapping a nervous rhythm against the wood. I don't hate you, they said after a long pause. But I don't understand you either. I don't understand why you made the choices you did. Sophia's breath hitched, the raw honesty of Alex's words cutting through her. She had always feared that Alex would hate her for what she had done, but now, hearing that they didn't, hearing that they wanted to understand, was both a relief and a new kind of pain. Because understanding meant revisiting the past. It meant opening up wounds that had never truly healed. I made those choices because I thought I was doing the right thing, Sophia said quietly, her hands trembling as she spoke. I wasn't ready to be a mother. I didn't have the means to take care of you. I thought giving you up would give you a better chance at life. But that doesn't mean it didn't break my heart to do it.
It did.
Every day. Alex looked up, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. For the first time, Sophia saw the vulnerability beneath the anger, the pain that had been festering for years, the same pain she had carried with her in silence. I just wanted to know why, Alex whispered. I just wanted to understand why I wasn't enough for you to stay. Sophia's heart shattered at those words, and she reached out, her hand hovering just above Alex's. You are enough, she said, her voice breaking. You've always been enough. It was me. I wasn't enough. I wasn't ready, and I've regretted that every day of my life. For a moment, it seemed like Alex might pull away, but then, slowly, they placed their hand in Sophia's. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. They were both trembling, both fragile in their pain, but for the first time in 25 years, they were connected. The cafe was still buzzing around them, but in that moment, it felt like the world had stopped. There were no easy answers, no quick resolutions, but the first step had been taken. The door that had been closed for so long had cracked open, just enough for the possibility of healing to slip through. The days following their first meeting were filled with silence, not from anger or avoidance, but from the weight of everything that had been said. Both Sophia and Alex had walked away from the cafe feeling raw, their emotions exposed in a way neither of them had been prepared for. It was as though they had opened a door that neither knew how to close, and now they were standing on either side of it, unsure of how to step forward. Sophia spent those days replaying the conversation in her mind, hearing Alex's voice, their pain, their uncertainty. She knew that no apology could erase the years they had lost, but the small connection they had made gave her hope. A hope she was almost afraid to believe in. And then, after several days of quiet, Alex reached out. It was a simple message, a request to meet again. No long explanations, No grand emotional declarations. Just a quiet question, as though they were both testing the waters, unsure of what to expect next. Sophia's heart skipped a beat when she saw the message, a mixture of fear and relief flooding her system. She responded immediately, agreeing to meet, and they settled on a park near Alex's apartment. Neutral ground, a place where they could talk without the weight of a closed room pressing in on them. When Sophia arrived, the sun was just beginning to set, casting a soft, golden light over the park. The air was cooler now, a gentle reminder that autumn was creeping in. She spotted Alex sitting on a bench beneath a large oak tree, their sketchpad open on their lap. For a moment, Sophia hesitated, watching them from a distance, her heart swelling with emotions she could barely contain. She took a deep breath and approached. "Hey," Alex said softly as she sat down beside them. They didn't look up from their sketchpad, their pencil moving slowly across the page, but their tone was softer, more relaxed than it had been at the cafe. "Hey," Sophia replied, her voice equally gentle. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound between them the soft scratching of Alex's pencil on paper and the distant laughter of children playing in the park. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, though. In a strange way, it felt like a step forward, an unspoken agreement that they didn't need to rush through the hard conversations all at once. Sophia glanced at the sketchpad, curious. "What are you drawing?" Alex hesitated for a moment, then handed her the sketchpad. It was a simple drawing, a loose sketch of the park around them, the trees, the benches, the path winding its way through the landscape. But there was something about the way Alex had captured the scene that made it feel alive, as though the quiet beauty of the moment had been distilled into lines and shapes. "It's beautiful," Sophia said, meaning every word. Alex shrugged, a small, shy smile tugging at the corners of their lips. "It's just something I like to do when I need to think." Sophia nodded, understanding more than Alex probably realized. She had always thrown herself into work when she needed to escape her emotions, building her career as a shield against the things she didn't want to feel. But now, sitting here with Alex, she realized that she didn't want to hide anymore. Not from her child, and not from the pain they had both carried for so long. "Thank you for meeting me again," Sophia said after a long pause. "I know this isn't easy for either of us." Alex nodded, their gaze still focused on the sketchpad. "I guess I just needed to know more. I've spent my whole life wondering about you, and now that you're here, I don't know what to do with it all." "I don't know either," Sophia admitted, her voice soft and raw. "But I'm here, and I want to be here. Whatever you need from me, I'll try my best." Alex looked at her then, their eyes searching her face, as though trying to decide whether to believe her. For a moment, Sophia feared that they would pull away again, that the fragile connection they had made would snap under the weight of the past. But then, slowly, Alex nodded. "I don't know what I need yet," they said, their voice quiet but steady. "But I'm willing to try. I don't want to be angry anymore. I've spent too much time being angry." Sophia's breath caught in her throat at those words. It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness, but it was something. It was a beginning. She could feel it, a small, tentative step toward healing. "Neither do I," Sophia replied. "I've spent too much time being afraid. And I don't want to be afraid anymore." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning, but this time the silence that followed was different. It wasn't filled with tension or uncertainty. It was filled with possibility. They continued to meet over the next few weeks, always in the park, always with the same quiet, tentative conversations. Each time, the wall between them seemed to lower just a little more. They didn't rush the process, didn't push each other for answers they weren't ready to give. Instead, they let their connection grow slowly, organically, like the trees around them, their roots deepening with each passing day. Sophia learned more about Alex's life, the struggles they had faced after their adoptive mother's death, the sense of loss and confusion that had followed them for years. Alex learned more about Sophia's past, the fear that had driven her decision to give them up, the guilt that had haunted her ever since. And with each conversation, the anger and resentment that had once clouded their relationship began to fade, replaced by a cautious hope. They were still healing, still learning how to be in each other's lives, but they were no longer strangers. They were something more. They were family. It was late afternoon, and the park was bathed in the soft, golden light of a setting sun. The leaves on the trees had begun to turn, painting the landscape in shades of orange, yellow, and red. Sophia and Alex walked side by side, neither of them in a hurry, their steps in quiet sync as they followed the familiar winding path through the park. It had become their ritual, these walks, these quiet moments where words weren't always necessary.
Today felt different, though.
There was a stillness between them, not of tension, but of something settled, something more peaceful. It had been weeks since their first hesitant meeting, and though they were still navigating the complexities of their past, they had begun to find a rhythm, a way of being together that felt less fraught with uncertainty. Sophia glanced over at Alex, who was carrying their ever-present sketchpad. Their brow was furrowed slightly in concentration as they absently sketched while walking, but there was a contentment in their expression that hadn't been there before. They looked different now, more at ease in her presence, more open. Sophia's heart swelled with a quiet, cautious joy as she watched them. It had been a long journey, and they were still walking it, but for the first time in years, she felt like she was no longer walking it alone. They reached the park bench where they had first met, and without a word, Alex sat down, setting their sketchpad aside. Sophia joined them, the two of them sitting in a comfortable silence as the world moved around them. The quiet hum of life filled the space between them, birds chirping in the trees, the distant laughter of children playing, the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Alex picked up their sketchpad and flipped to a fresh page. "I've been working on something," they said softly, their voice carrying a new warmth that hadn't been there before. Sophia smiled gently. "Can I see?" Alex hesitated for a moment, then nodded, turning the sketchpad toward her. It was a simple but striking drawing, a rendering of the park bench they were sitting on, but not just the bench. There were two figures sketched in delicate, soft lines, sitting together. It was them. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she looked at the drawing, her heart swelling with emotion. The sketch was so simple, yet it captured something profound, the quiet connection that had grown between them, the slow, tentative steps they had taken toward each other. "It's beautiful," Sophia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You've captured everything." Alex smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and for the first time, Sophia saw in their eyes not just the pain of the past, but the hope of something new. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. The warmth of the moment wrapped around them like a soft blanket, and for the first time in years, Sophia felt a sense of peace settle over her. She reached out, her hand gently resting on Alex's shoulder. Alex didn't pull away. Instead, they leaned into the touch, just slightly, but it was enough. As the sun set, casting the park in a golden glow, Sophia knew that this was their beginning. Not a perfect one, not free of the scars of the past, but a beginning built on truth, on connection, on love. And that, for both of them, was enough. Several months had passed since that quiet moment in the park, and though the seasons had changed, the sense of peace that had begun to blossom between Sophia and Alex remained. The path toward healing hadn't been easy. There were still difficult conversations, moments of tension, and memories that stirred pain, but they were navigating it together now. And that made all the difference. Sophia stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, smoothing down the fabric of her dress. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple outfit for a simple dinner, but the occasion felt special. Tonight, she was going to Alex's apartment for the first time, invited to join them and a few friends for dinner. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. After years of separation, uncertainty, and guilt, she was finally becoming a part of her child's life, not as an outsider, but as someone welcomed in. She glanced at the small, framed photo on her dresser, the only photo she had kept of Alex as a baby. She hadn't had the courage to display it before, but now, it sat proudly in her room, a symbol of the past she was no longer afraid to confront. She smiled at the image, her heart swelling with love and hope. The drive to Alex's apartment was filled with a mixture of nervous excitement and quiet reflection. The city passed by in a blur of lights and colors, but Sophia's mind was on the evening ahead. She had been slowly integrating into Alex's life over the past few months, each visit or conversation a small victory in the long road to reconciliation. Alex had begun to trust her, to open up about their life, their passions, their dreams. And Sophia, in turn, had shared more of herself than she ever thought she would. It was a delicate dance, but one they were both learning to navigate with care. When she arrived at Alex's apartment, she took a deep breath before knocking on the door. The sound of laughter greeted her from the other side, and a moment later, the door swung open to reveal Alex, a warm smile on their face. "Hey, come in," they said, stepping aside to let her enter. Sophia's nerves eased slightly as she stepped inside, taking in the cozy atmosphere. The apartment was small but filled with warmth. Paintings hung on the walls, some of them undoubtedly Alex's work, and the scent of home-cooked food filled the air. A few of Alex's friends were already gathered around the dining table, chatting and laughing, their energy infectious. "Everyone, this is Sophia," Alex said, introducing her to the group. There was no hesitation in their voice, no awkwardness in the introduction. Just a simple statement that made Sophia's heart swell. The evening unfolded with an ease that surprised Sophia. She had been so afraid of intruding, of not belonging, but Alex's friends were kind and welcoming, and the conversation flowed naturally. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sophia allowed herself to relax, to laugh, to simply be present in the moment. She watched as Alex interacted with their friends, their laughter light and free, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. At one point during the evening, Alex caught her eye from across the table, and they shared a small, private smile. It was a smile filled with unspoken understanding, with the acknowledgement of how far they had come and how much further they still had to go. But in that moment, it felt like enough. Later, as the evening wound down and the guests began to leave, Sophia stayed behind to help clean up. Alex moved around the kitchen, stacking dishes and putting away leftovers, while Sophia dried the plates. It was a simple, domestic scene, but it felt monumental in its own way, proof that they were building something real together. "You know," Alex said after a while, their tone thoughtful, "I wasn't sure how tonight was going to go. But I'm glad you came." Sophia paused, setting down the dish towel. "I'm glad I came, too," she said softly. "I've been waiting a long time for something like this." Alex looked over at her, their expression open and sincere. "Me too." They finished cleaning up in comfortable silence, and when the last dish was put away, Alex pulled out a small canvas from behind the counter. Sophia recognized it immediately. It was the painting Alex had promised her a few weeks ago, something they had been working on but hadn't yet shown her. "I wanted to give you this," Alex said, handing it to her. "I thought it was about time." Sophia took the canvas, her breath catching in her throat as she looked at it. The painting was of a tree, its branches strong and full, its roots deep and sprawling. It was a beautiful, vibrant image, and yet there was something deeply symbolic about it. The tree felt like a representation of their journey, the growth, the strength, the connection that had finally begun to take root between them. "It's beautiful," Sophia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." Alex smiled, their eyes soft. "It felt right. We're still growing, still figuring things out. But I wanted you to have something that shows how far we've come." Sophia felt the tears welling in her eyes, but this time, they were tears of joy, of hope. She set the painting down carefully and pulled Alex into a gentle embrace. They stood there for a moment, holding each other, both of them breathing in the quiet sense of peace that had settled between them. "I love you," Sophia whispered, the words coming easily now, without fear or hesitation. "I love you, too," Alex replied, their voice equally soft but filled with certainty. As they pulled apart, Sophia looked at Alex, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. This was their new beginning. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. And for the first time in years, Sophia allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future filled with love, with connection, and with hope. As she left Alex's apartment that night, the streets quiet and calm, Sophia felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The sky above was clear, and the moonlight cast a soft glow on the world around her. And in her heart, she knew that the future, though uncertain, was filled with the promise of healing, of reconciliation, and of a love that would continue to grow, strong and unwavering, like the roots of the tree in Alex's painting.